Yellow and Red Makes by Digits 27 in Chapter 42. Naruto made sure to wipe the trickle of blood that escaped his mouth before he slid the door to the hospital room open. He walked in slowly, peeking his head around to make sure it was the right room before shutting it but before him with a small click. Tayuya was already there, sitting in the chair next to the bed while she was watching over Fu's sleeping body. Naruto wasn't sure why she was there. She and Fu only really talked once, and he wasn't complaining. If Naruto walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder, Tayuya didn't flinch from the contact, having heard Naruto enter the room. Do you know how she is? Tayuya just nodded, her eyes still on Fu's meekly smiling face. Yeah, some prick of a doctor was marveling at how fast she was recovering as I booted him out, making too much fucking fuss over it anyway. Naruto hesitated the urge to laugh at the way Tayuya put it. He knew Fu would be alright. She was tougher tougher than she looked, and Chomei wouldn't let anything too bad happen to her. Tayuya looked up at him, smirking slightly at his concerned expression. You know, she's so much like you already. Not to raise an eyebrow, but allowed her to finish. I've only ever seen you be that selfish. She looked down a little sadly. Honestly, I never thought I would see somebody act that way for you. Naruto just leaned down and planted a quick and chaste kiss on Tayuya's cheek, causing the girl to blush. You know you still owe me for running out to fight that bastard and leaving me like that. Naruto's grin grew as tension in the air lifted slightly. Please, Oni-san, not in my room. Naruto's head whipped around to see Fu gently open her eyes, wincing at the light from the sun streaming in through the blinds. Naruto took the hand and walked over to the window, pulling them tighter, which earned him an appreciative smile. He came back over and dropped himself on the side of the bed so that he could wrap an arm around Fu's shoulder. Hey, Moto, how are you feeling? The girl smiled weakly and chuckled a little, almost bringing a coughing fit, but she suppressed it. Like I just spent a day with Yujito-Nissan. Naruto joined in on her laughter while Tayuya just sat to the side, slightly confused that she was left out of the loop. Naruto's eyes widened slightly as he suddenly remembered why he had come here and quickly began rooting around in one of the pouches hidden on his coat. Oh, Foom. I almost forgot. He came back up, clutching something in both hands, which obscured it from view. I was going to give you this after Gaara officially made Yoshinobi, but I guess you earned it a little sooner. He opened his arms, smiling warmly as Fu's eyes watered a little. In his open palm was a long strip of dark blue cloth, and attached to it was a single metal plate, lovingly engraved with the kanji for 7. Fu took it almost reverently, her eyes still wateringly, but still not quite ready to cry yet. I guess I should have given it to you sooner. He reached up with a chuckle and gently touched the bandage around Fu's forehead, taking his hand away when she winced. But I guess better late than. He was interrupted as Fu rocketed forward, capturing her older brother in a hug that made both of them wince from their recent injuries. They broke apart when Tayuya coughed loudly into her hand, startling both of them out of the moment. Sorry to interrupt, but that's my job. Both Fu and Naruto smiled sheepishly as they rubbed the back of their heads, irrespectively oblivious that they were perfectly emulating one another. Tayuya just groaned and put her head in her hands. Oh, great, there are 2 of them now. She sighed and smiled as she walked around the bed, capturing Naruto in an equally warm embrace. The blonde gladly returned it, happy to be holding his girlfriend close, even if she was pressing on a still sore burn. This time the hug was broken by Fu coughing into her own palm, which Tayuya promptly ignored and continued anyway, sticking out a tongue in the mid-held girl's direction. Hey, Tayuya smiled smugly and only clutched Naruto tighter, eliciting a small wince. Sorry, Fu. Girlfriend before sisters. She laughed, but pouted when Naruto firmly but gently pushed her off of him. Sorry, I think I've had all the hugs I can manage today. He barked of the statement of clutching his side rather painfully before smiling all the same. Aw, well, isn't that a shame? You just look so adorable right now. All 3 occupants of the room turned to see a smirking Matsuri standing at the door of the room with Gaara just to her side. He coughed and Trixan awkwardly, not used to seeing his 2 friends so close, even though he had suspected it long before it actually happened. I hope we aren't interrupting anything. Naruto just adopted his classic pose, his cheeks only slightly tinged red. No, of course not. What do you need, Gar? The young Kazekage sighed, but nodded anyway, walking further into the room and sitting in a chair near the bed. Do you? I think it's time you told us everything you found about the Katsuki. Sasori is dead, so you remain undercover. It has been so you remain undercover has become pointless. After tonight, I know we need all the help we can get if we want to just stay alive. He looked around the room, making sure to look into Fu, Tayuya, and Naruto's faces one at a time. From this point on, nobody is to engage in a Katsuki member in combat alone. None of us are ready for battle. None of us are ready or able. He received a round nod to his approval and took a deep breath. Okay, Tayuya, tell us everything you know. When she was done, the room was bathed in an unsettling silence, with the news that the members of the elusive organization were tough were tough was expected. It didn't lighten the blow. Everybody was left to their own thoughts in order to think about the challenges they would be facing in the future. Naruto seemed especially pensive as his mind ran through all the information he had been given. His eyes were narrow narrowed in concentration, and the veritable cogs in his brain were turned furiously in order to come up with plans and strategies. Information was power, and knowing your enemies proved almost invaluable in a conflict. However, at no point could they assume their information was complete. They could always have to be they would always have to be prepared for the unexpected. Naruto knew that the Katsuki must know almost as much about him as surely as he did about them now. Luckily, from what Tayuya told them, they had been dealt a crippling blow with the loss of Sasori. Their spy network would take months to recover completely. The way he saw it, the next major target would be Kakuzu, the money behind the organization. Without those two key players, the Katsuki would be severely weakened. Maybe not as much ability wise, but more generally, which in many ways was more important. Ideally, they would simply want to kill every last member to make sure that there is nobody left to resurrect the organization from whatever ashes they left behind. That meant taking on the leader, the Enigma, the one that nobody had any information about. To get to him, they would first have to get through Konon, the woman with some kind of bloodline that allowed her to control paper like Gaara could stand. She was the one partnered with the leader. She would have the information they needed. Unfortunately, to get to her, they had to first go through the other members. Naruto just sighed into his palm. He was 16 years old. He was a 16-year-old boy. This kind of responsibility didn't belong on his shoulders. However, he would bear it as long as there was breath in his body, and he could protect the people close to him. Well, there's no use antagonizing over it. We might as well just get on with our lives. Everybody just stared at the blonde incredulously, except for Gaara, who nodded impassively. What are you talking about, shithead? Did those Akatsuki fuckers rattle a few bolts loose in that brick you call a head? Don't you understand how serious all of this is? Naruto turned to her with a small smile that made her stop mid-rant. There was no anger there, a hint of tiredness maybe, but otherwise just a serene calm. Of course I do, Tayuya-chan. I'm taking this as serious as I can. I'm just saying there's no use in going after them. Sooner or later they will have to come to us. Tayuya seemed like she wanted to refute that, to say they should be out there hunting them down before they could strike first. But Naruto's eyes kept her from speaking. Gar can't just go up and leave. He has a village to run and a fiance to look after. Matsuri pouted a little at the implication she needed looking after, but one look at Gaara and she reevaluated just who would be protecting whom if it came to a fight. We also needed to warn the other Jinchuriki if we can. If they were here tonight, then for all we know, they're already going after the others. Sure, we got a few of them, but there are still 8 more S-rank shinobi who could kill any one of us if they got us alone. Toya nodded meekly. She was a proud Kunoichi, but she wasn't arrogant. She had seen firsthand what Sasori and Deidara could do, and they were powerful. Deidara was even the lowest member besides Toby. Everybody else was even more dangerous. So for now, we just carry on, we train, we prepare, but we wait for them to come to us. We wait until the fight is on our terms. We need every advantage we can get. By the end of by the end of his small speech, his voice was a whisper, and he wasn't meeting any of the others in the eye. So he hugged his arm lightly, and he offered a small smile as her vibrant hair fell against his shoulder. You're right. Sorry, Naruto. His eyes opened wider a bit at the admittance, but softened as he just rubbed her back reassuringly. Powerful words, Naruto. Perhaps you would have been better suited for Kasukage. Gar said it with a small smirk as Naruto knew he wasn't serious, but he grinned back he grinned back all the same. Aw, who needs a title like Kasukage stuck behind a desk all day? I'm still going to be a legendary shinobi, and no asshole in a black cloak is going to stop me. So you actually felt a bit of pride swell in her chest as she heard her boyfriend call the Katsuki members that. For the first time, she felt as though she was rubbing off on him instead of the other way around, and it made her feel good, special even. Yes, well, on your line of thinking, I have in fact sent word to Kumigakure that the Katsuki have made their move. Perhaps it would be wise to go and check on them soon to make sure they are okay. While I have confidence in the Kage Dono's abilities as well as those of his Jinchuriki, caution is recommendation in this situation like this. Naruto nodded. It would be good to see Yujito and B anyways. You're right, Gara, but first, there's something I have to do. He turned, smiled at Yuya as he rubbed away the hair on her neck to reveal the tritoma mark that still lay there. I promise I made a long time ago. Taiya whimpered a little as his fingers traced over the sensitive flesh, but it wasn't noticeable enough for anybody but Naruto to see. So, I need to make a little stop in Konoha along the way. Gaara and Fu raised their brow at his declaration, while Matsurugi just seemed rather caught up in the moment. Konoha, Naruto nodded confidently. That's right, I need to speak with Sasuke Uchiha. I would ask you to stay a few days at least. You have only just returned. I'm sure there are a few people you would like to visit or say hello to. Naruto looked at his friend for a moment, thinking about his words as they walked down the corridor together. Toya Matsuri had gone off somewhere. The redhead looked slightly more reluctant than her goodling companion. As you said, you are in no rush. The Katsuki will find you when they will, assuming they even know about the deaths of the companions. Naruto nodded with his face twisting into a small smile. We shouldn't start underestimating them now. The Setsu Toyoto talked about is supposed to be almost as good a spy as Satsuri's organization. Gara nodded, knowing this already, but offering just the smallest glimmer of hope in an otherwise rather bleak time. Fine, but the point remains the same. Konoha is only 2 days away at best. You can leave in a few days. It will be good to catch up anyway. Naruto smiled warmly, nodding back at his friends as they continued through the empty mansion. Speaking of which, Naruto smiled quickly formed into a smirk. Matsuri, what's the story there? If Gaara hadn't been wearing his sand armor, Naruto would have been able to see his blush spread across his pale face. Yes, well, that's a long story. Naruto's smirk only grew. Well, I am staying for a few days. Gar eyed him with an irritated look before it softened, and he chuckled. Yeah, well, I walked into that one, didn't I? Naruto just grinned cheerfully. Where do I begin? He looked down on thought before a small but genuine smile spread across his face. Already, I guess it started when we first met at the academy. Naruto looked at him in confusion, and Gar quickly clarified. Not while we were there. Later, after you left for your training trip, her class was in their last year, and I was coming to check on everything to get used. On my role at the time, Tamara had expressed an interest in teaching, so naturally, Kakuto tried it as well. However, he quickly grew bored with it when none of the students appreciated his puppetry. Naruto laughed, imagining Kakuto getting the cold shoulder from getting younger than he was. I watched over them as they split the class into groups to begin weapons training. As a joke, Tamara offered me up as one of the sensei. He looked away as the bear's hints of sadness evident in his pupil's eyes. At the time, I was still new as the Kasukage. People still thought of me as I was before. In fact, they seemed to get worse for a while when you left. Naruto also looked pained and placed a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder. That's behind me now. I'm the Kasakage, and people respect me for it. I see it every day when I walk down the streets. Nacho smiled softly as Guy returned to his normal self again, repressing the memories for a worse time. Anyway, many of the students took what Tamari said literally, but still nobody wanted me as a sensei. I was still the weapon, the dangerous boy their parents warned them from. Nato felt a pang of sadness again, wondering how bad things would have been if he and Gara had never found each other. However, Matsuri stepped forward. Later, she told me it was because she was curious, mostly about my gourd, but also because she saw something in me. He smiled again. To this day, she won't tell me what, but nevertheless, she stepped forward. Back then, she was so against using weapons. Her mother was killed in the last war, and she never quite got over it. I tried to explain what that weapon was something used only to protect those you care about. He smiled as he looked up. Something you taught me, in fact. He returned the smile as they carried on through the corridors. In fact, it took me getting kidnapped to actually get over my fear of weapons. Thalia looked at the girl curiously. Matsuru may have been a year younger than her, but she showed a remarkable maturity for a girl of 15. I was used as bait. A group sought him out to test his status as the ultimate weapon against their own. As a student, they thought I would be the best bait to draw him out of the village. Thalia nodded, having heard God speak of something like that offhand on the day she came back. He saved me, of course, fighting off everybody who kidnapped me. He even got me over my own fear of weapons. She looked down quietly, but I still wouldn't want to kill somebody with them. Thalia nodded despite not really understanding where the girl was coming from. She had no inhibitions against killing as long as it was for the right reasons, like protecting people she cared about or fulfilling the mission. Even so, she respected Matsuri in a way for at least sticking to her beliefs. She had heard of Ambu members who had gone their entire careers without a kill. After that, everything sort of went back to normal for a while. Like nothing ever happened at all. Gar continued to train me whenever he could. I understood he was busy as the Kasakage, but he found time. Whenever I asked how he could do it, he always told me just to thank Naruto for some reason. So he smirked a little at the implied joke, while Matsuri looked at her confused before turning back to the corridor. I always respected Garo. Without my mother around, I was never really told to stay away from him, but I was shy, and the other children were so afraid of him. As she looked down sadly, I guess I caved a little to peer pressure, but I still respected him and Naruto for what they held inside of them and what they had to endure. I don't even know when it turned into something more. We spent a lot of time together, so I suppose it was only natural. Tail smiled at that. Yeah, I can understand that. Matsuri smirked suggestively but didn't pry. Tail's love of privacy was well known to everybody around her at the academy. I still remember when he first asked her out to a date. I was a nervous wreck. Usually, I would ask you for support in situations like these, or maybe to you for some advice. Instead, I had to go to Konkuro. That was a mistake I won't be repeating. Naruto just laughed, wiping a tear from his eyes. Konkuro spent just a little too much time around puppets. The line between flesh and wood blurred a little after so much dedication. He was hardly the person to go to concerning advice about women. He told me to take her somewhere fancy and expensive. It just became awkward because neither of us knew what to say. Eventually, we left, still not having said a word to each other until we reached her house. He smiled, looking wistfully out of a window they passed as if he could see the spot from the vantage point. I was about to turn and leave when she planted a small kiss on my cheek. His small smile turned into something akin to a grin for Gara. She had to spit the sand out of her mouth as I apologized profusely. Naruto imagined the scene, and his laughter only increased. She asked if she could do it again without the sand armor, and ever since then our relationship has only improved. Naruto nodded happily. He was genuinely glad that Gara had found someone in the way he had found Tayuya, at least after he had finally realized just what she had meant to him. And then a year and a half later, he proposed. It was the most romantic day of my life. A small blush crossed over her face as she looked down with a small smirk. And the most romantic night. And Taiya blushed a little as well at the implication. it couldn't have been more perfect. He took me up to the top of the walls where he had prepared a picnic for us. Do you raise an eyebrow at that? A picnic didn't really sound like ours thing. He must have asked Tamari. And then he raised the dome of sand over us so the moon acted like a floodlight on just the two of us, like the rest of the world didn't exist. Her face softened as it turned nostalgic before returning to its usual mischievous smile. And then, of course, there was the ring. She coughed and raised her hand up nostalgically, but in a manner that obviously showed off the gleamingly gem adorning her finger. The large diamond was set on a band of gold that looked like two intertwining ribbons that swirled in intricate swirls and patterns that were almost dizzying to follow. Tayu was never one for jewelry, but even she had to admit it was a beautiful ring. Plus, the sex is amazing. Naruto lays in the comfy chair, idly spinning a kunai on the tip of his finger. He was beginning to see the benefit of the tri-pronged design. They were perfect for close combat because they could be used to disarm opponents, and they were heavier than a normal kunai. That little factor also made it could travel farther through the air when thrown, which made them perfect for their primary purpose. And they were slightly less aerodynamic, which took a toll on their accuracy. But the Horizon in Fuji no Iki didn't really require that much accuracy. So how did you get Tamari to agree to set that whole picnic thing up anyway? It's not like her to help someone out for free, even her brother. Gar continued to look out the window, idly musing on something as a few shadow clones moved about the office, tidying and sorting documents. And she asked to be put in charge of the tuning exams this year. She didn't say why, and I didn't ask him. Now she just nodded. He would ask his fellow blonde Suna shinobi later anyway. Wait, aren't they in Konoha this time? Gara just nodded. How did you know? Naruto shrugged with a smile. I had to keep aware of news while I was gone, in case there were any good training opportunities. Gar took a deep breath, signifying that he had heard Naruto, but didn't look away from the window. Strange, you told me a lot about your time in Kumagakure, and even your stint in the Land of Water, but you haven't spoken much of the second year of your training. Naruto shrugged lightly, still focused on the kunai in his hand as he tried to add another to a second finger. Me and Fu moved around a lot. Didn't really stay in the same place for longer than a month. We got jobs where we could for money, helped a couple of folks out. They even got a place in a movie at one point. God raised an eyebrow, but still didn't turn. Let's see. Restored a princess to her throne and overthrew a tyrant. We went to a country to the south of the elemental nations where they don't use chakra, but this weird green rock thing had a brief stint in prison. If you'd believe it, technicality mostly, but it all worked out. Met another swordsman of the mist, beat him and took his swords. He grinned as he patted the seal on his side. Oh, and I visited Hoshigakure. Fu made a few friends before we had to leave because of some instability. We did end up overthrowing the Hoshigakure though. Weird village, that one. As he spoke, he seemed to count off the events on his fingers. His eyes roaming around as he tried to think of anything else. The two of them did after leaving May and her rebels. After that, we went back to Kiri for a while to see how it was going. The war was over by then, and the rebels were still celebrating. I almost regret not staying to help them out, but I guess it all worked out in the end. May is the new Mizukage, which is cool. Gar just nodded. The information wasn't new to him, and he had already sent envoys to May for talks of an alliance. Iwo wouldn't like all the other countries being in alliance they wanted no part in, and was currently vying with Suna for the rights to a treaty. Now that God knew Naruto had a personal connection to the new Mizukage, he could personally use that in his favor. It was slightly manipulative, but sometimes he had to put the village first. His role as Kasukage was clear to him. Then, after that, we went back to Kumo for a bit to let B and Yujito know how our training was going before we came back here. Gar nodded, taking all of this in. It was obviously a hurried and abridged version, but he could ask about his adventures in more depth later. It sounds It sounds eventful. Naruto just nodded happily. Yeah, made a lot of friends. His smile turned into a small frown as he looked down at the finely carpeted floor. Lost a lot of good friends too. Gar finally turned from his position at the window, looking at Naruto with sadness. It comes as part of the job, Naruto. You should know that. The blonde nodded tiredly and looked up with a faint smile after drawing a deep breath. I know, Gara. It inspires me to train harder so I don't have to see it again. Naruto smiled, glad that Naruto was at least learning from his various hardships instead of getting lost in them like so many good shinobi did. I'm kind of tired. Yesterday was pretty exhausting, and I didn't get much sleep. I'll go see if Tayuya wants to go to bed yet. Gar just nodded impassively, returning to his musings at the window as Naruto got up to leave. Naruto pulled away from another kiss. I came here. Tayuya was doing her best attempt to prevent him from talking as her soft lips assaulted his own. To ask you, she was really trying hard now. If you want to sleep, Tayuya pulled away, panting only lightly with a smile on her face as her hungry eyes looked him over. What's the fun in that? Her smile darkened mischievously. Besides, you owe me for last night anyway. That Akatsuki prick made us stop halfway through. Naruto just shrugged and leaned forward for another kiss. So all of a sudden, he wasn't feeling that tired anyway. After last night, he had grown slightly bored as he placed his hand on Tayuya's chest. He stopped fondly making her grind into his crotch even harder as she groaned into his mouth. Clothes were discarded without abandon as to them soon found themselves topless, still rolling around on the bed, locking at the lips. One of Naruto's hands was still firmly on Tayuya's exposed breast, kneading it to her pleasure and occasionally pinching the nipple to make her scream out in surprise and delight. His other hand was less committed to one area, roaming her abdomen as it trailed nonchalantly nonsensual pass across her toned stomach. Eventually, it trailed lower, as if drained by drawn by some strange magnetism that called out to her as it gently slipped underneath the fabric of Tayuya's shorts. Skip lemon. Fuck, shithead. That was intense. I hope you're not done. She made a move for the waistband of his pants before his hand caught her wrist, and he looked at her with a gaze that she didn't recognize. It was akin to reluctance, but it wasn't quite that. It almost looked like concern. Are you sure about this, Tayuya? I mean, we don't have to do it if you don't want to. She looked up at him, smiling like he was just being silly, and continued to tug at his pants while his hands remained firm. I mean, Tayuya, I want both of us to be ready when we first, Tayuya still felt confident, but Naruto's words began to affect her. The post-orgasmic haze was lifting from her mind, and she began to evaluate her own actions more carefully. She sighed as she let go, not just still looking worried about her as her head dropped. Yeah, maybe you're right. We shouldn't rush things. Hell, we've only been back with each other for a few days. Naruto just nodded slowly and trying his best at a comfortable smile as the flopped onto the bed, making sure to pull the blonde with her. She turned, resting on her head with her elbow on the bed, and she looked at Naruto. Sometimes you're too selfish for your own good. You know that, right? She just nodded sheepishly with a small smile as he planted a chaste kiss on her cheek. He moved to go back down to the bed, but Tayuya just grinned and grabbed his head, pulling herself on top of him as she leaned in for a deeper, more passionate kiss. Hey, we may not be doing it tonight, but that doesn't mean we're fucking done here. End of chapter 42.